Unlike a lot of other FPS games, the guns in Apex can be a little difficult to use, particularly if you are new to the game. However, there are a lot of people who use many of the guns in ways that are actually holding them back, even at intermediate and advanced levels. So today, for you, I've got 3 guns everyone uses wrong and how to fix it. But first, if you really want to get more in-depth guides, make sure to head over to the GameLeap website, where we have literally hundreds of guides to help you improve faster. Guides covering fundamentals, advanced movement techniques, advanced legend tutorials, gameplay breakdowns, and so much more. If you actually want to learn faster and become insane in the game, I highly recommend you join the GameLeap family to get instant access to all these in-depth guides by checking out the link in the description below. Okay, for our first gun, it's the Peacekeeper. Now, the Peacekeeper is one of those guns where you either love it or you hate it, but most of the time, even if you love it, you still hate it. Either way, you're gonna get those 9 damage hits at some point. Let me correct that statement. Most of the time, and usually it's when you need your shot to hit the most. Now, there are a couple of issues we need to consider when it comes to the PK. First of all is the delay, and this applies to any shotgun, but if you use auto sprint, which I know many of you do, including myself because I'm a movement person and I prefer it for movement, but you need to be aware that when using this setting, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot if you aren't careful. This is because all the guns have a draw time, and when you sprint forward, it increases the amount of time it takes to actually ready your gun. In a close quarters fight, this is the worst possible thing that you could do, because the closer you are to the enemy, the more significant time actually becomes. And obviously the PK is a close quarters weapon, so time is always of the essence, especially considering that it has such a long time between shots. So how can you avoid this? Well, my friend, all you have to do is not press the forward input, or time your forward inputs with the moment that you have to lever the gun. Lever the gun. Is that the correct terminology? I don't know. I'm not a gun person in real life, but you get what I'm saying. Basically, only press the forward input if you need to for your strafing, and only do it while you are leverizing, whatever.
Levering.
Making the gun ready for go boom boom. Also, I will point out, as long as you are only inputting left and right for your strafing, this issue can be completely avoided without having to time anything. The other thing people tend to do wrong with the PK is actually play with the choke on. Now, this is more of a personal preference sort of thing, but there are some things you definitely need to consider when it comes to the PK choke. First of all, the PK is super loud when you're aiming down sights and charging the choke, not to mention it is super bright and easy to see. So a good player will use that information to change the dynamic of the fight, such as do a 180 wall bounce through a choke point while you ADS to throw off your aim, or just completely reposition to avoid your charge PK. It tells them exactly what you are doing, which is standing in a rather stagnant manner, aiming down sights at a single point, making you very predictable and actually very vulnerable. The other issue is that the tighter the pellet spread, the harder it is to actually hit your shots. That is why you always want to hip fire with a PK in close quarters fights, because at that range, their hitbox is larger, so it is more likely for you to actually hit more pellets. Which, by the way, in these situations, you want to aim for center of their torso, not upper chest, and this is again to increase the likelihood of hitting more pellets. But in general, it is just a lot easier to be consistent with the choke off, and many high-level players will agree, including Mandy. And that dude is insane. But that doesn't mean you can't use the choke if you want to, but those are big points you really need to keep in mind while aiming down sight. The last mistake people tend to make with the PK is just panic flicking like crazy in hopes to hit your shot. Now, the problem with this is the fact that the PK has such a long time between shots, making it extremely punishing if you miss. So you are always going to be much better off taking the extra time to line up and ensure you are going to hit that shot. The only exception here is if you are well practiced with flicking. If you actively practice flicking in the firing range or aim trainers, then likely that will be the better option for you, because you will be able to do it with success 90% of the time. But if you do not, which is probably 90% of the player base, then pacing your shots is 100% the play. Alright, next up we have the Mastiff. In my opinion, the Mastiff is a lot more forgiving than the PK for multiple reasons, mainly because of the faster fire rate and the design of its pellet spread. But the problem people tend to have with the Mastiff is, funnily enough, the exact opposite of the PK. They tend not to ADS in close quarters fights. However, taking the quick scoping approach actually allows you to tighten the pellet spread, making it more likely for you to hit those pelly boys, because the Mastiff has a built-in choke when you ADS. Now, you might be thinking, why ADS with the Mastiff and not the PK? How is it different? And that's simply because of the way that the Mastiff's pellets are patterned, which is a long horizontal line, while the PK is in a star formation, which essentially gives it a feel of being a big circle with holes in it. A lot of holes. The pellet spread with the Mastiff is so wide wide that briefly ADSing before each shot makes it more likely to hit more pellets. You don't have to worry about the verticality of the pellet spread, you only have to worry about the horizontal aspect of it. And that is why ADSing works in this situation, especially since it's so wide. It sounds counterintuitive, but I promise you, this works better than you think, and it's not like you have to hold it forever to let the choke kick in. Just treat it like you were quick scoping with a sniper and you're good to go. Alright, now for the gun that is probably the easiest one to misuse, the Wingman. This gun could probably get its own video to be honest, but I'll do my best to condense it to the important details. First of all, the Wingman is very much like the PK in many ways. If you take a look at Storman, who's obviously cracked and a regular user of the Wing Boy, in really close quarters fights, he tends to hipfire the Wingman, not ADS, which the common idea with the Wingman is that you just ADS in close quarters fights because you don't lose nearly as much strafe speed as you do with other weapons since it's a pistol. In fact, your ADS strafe speed is the same as when you hipfire when using the Wingman. So the thought process was that you can be more accurate without losing movement speed in close quarters fights. But here is the thing, when you ADS, you significantly increase your zoom, and in close quarters fights, this makes it much more difficult to line up shots and remain accurate while they're zooming around in your face. An extreme example of this is when you try to ADS with a 3x scope in close quarters, it is just way too hard to keep track as they move in front of you. Again, that's an extreme version, but the concept still applies. The closer you are, the harder ADSing becomes and the stronger hipfire gets. Also, while you hipfire, it is much easier to be accurate while you are crouch spamming and doing more erratic strafes, since you don't have to adjust for your own movement nearly as much as when you are ADSing in CQC. So that is what I recommend doing, especially when you are in really close quarters, the point blank fights, start whiffing your shots really hard, just stop and try hipfiring instead. It's a lot easier than you think. However, doing this might not be as easy past the 8-meter mark, so this is where ADSing will start to be the better option. The problem here is that everyone tends to make the same mistake of, again, panic flicking in hopes to land a shot. You must avoid this at all costs. This is a surefire way to get sent back to the lobby, so to avoid that, your thought process should be to make each and every single shot you take intentional. If you catch yourself in a panic flick mode where you're tunnel visioning out and just trying to get the kill, literally just stop, take a breath, and bring your awareness back and line up your shot. I cannot tell you how many times this has saved me, and the more you can do this passively without thinking about it, the better your Wingman aim is going to be. Now, that doesn't mean you can't flick. In fact, in this range of 8 to 15 meters, flicking can often be more effective than if you were to just hip fire or tracking. However, that is only if you're well practiced with flicking, and again, each flick should be 100% intentional, with direction and with purpose, whatever you want to call it. You just need to avoid the issue of losing focus and entering panic shoot mode, and you will know when you're in that mode because you'll begin feeling really desperate and obviously, yet painfully, you will be missing all your shots. But the biggest problem when it comes to flicking is when you're actually strafing. We as humans like uniformity and synchronization. It is much easier for our brain to process something that is in synchronization than it is to process something that is offset, and this is why most of us fall into a habit of synchronizing our strafe shifts in direction with our Wingman shots. This is a huge no-no. The problem is if you change directions while taking your shot at the same time, you are effectively making your bullet move more in the direction that you are moving to, not where you originally were taking the shot, especially because of its slower bullet travel time. So avoid changing strafe directions at the same time as taking your shot, and instead shoot between each shift in direction. This is the #1 thing that has helped my Wingman flicking recently, so I highly recommend you try it out. It works really well. But if you are not good at flicking at all and don't actively practice it in aim trainers or in the firing range, then the most consistent option for you is to rely more on tracking. And again, this comes with the idea of pacing your shots, but treating the Wingman like a tracking gun is one of the easiest and fastest ways to become more consistent with it. And even if you ask Soar Hollow, who is a Voltaic Grandmaster level aimer, which is basically the top 1%, I think actually even higher than that, but he says focusing on tracking is the play when it comes to the Wingman. But the other issue people tend to make here is track and not lead. But as I said, the Wingman has an extremely low bullet velocity, and this is one of the reasons it's so difficult to use. However, if and when you use it and remember to just lead your target always just ever so slightly, you're definitely going to see more consistency. And finally, the biggest mistake you can make when using the Wingman is spamming the trigger too fast. The problem with doing this is that you end up shooting later than you actually expect, so again, as a result, your bullet won't go where you expect it to. In your brain, you pulled the trigger, but then the trigger only activates milliseconds after. You see the problem here? This is not how aiming works. This weapon has a much slower fire rate than something like the P2020, so unlike it, you can't just spam and hope for the best. This is just another reason why with the wingman, the name of the game is intention and pacing. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Johnny. Okay, love you, bye.